Step away from the yard, hands where we can see them. The command came sharp, amplified by flashing lights and drawn attention. Neighbors stopped. Phones came out. She stood there still, holding nothing more than a garden tool. No resistance, no explanation, just silence in the middle of rising tension. And for a moment, it looked like she had no control over what was about to happen, until the street filled with engines. It was the kind of afternoon that didn't ask for anything. Warm, unhurried, the particular quality of light that falls on residential streets in the hours before dinner. Softening edges, making everything look a little more permanent than it is. Sprinklers in a yard 2 houses down. A dog moving slowly along a fence line. The low, background hum of a neighborhood existing without incident. She had been outside for about an hour. The front yard was a modest one, a low fence along the sidewalk edge, a stretch of ground that needed attention, a flower bed that had been overtaken by something it shouldn't have been. She was working on it the way people work on things they care about without being precious about them. Methodically, unhurried, a pair of garden shears in one hand, and a focused quietness in her posture that had nothing to do with the street around her. She was wearing what people wear when they expect nothing to happen. Dark trousers, a plain shirt, sleeves pushed to the elbow. Nothing that announced anything. Nothing that marked her as someone who should be looked at twice, or once, or at all, which was precisely the point of an afternoon like this, in a yard like this, doing work like this. Someone had called it in. Exactly who and exactly what they'd said would matter later. But in the moment, what arrived at the responding officer's ears was a report of a disturbance at a residential address. A figure in the yard. Behavior that had struck someone as, the word used was, unusual. The 2 officers arrived within 4 minutes. Standard response to an ambiguous call. Alert, measured, operating on incomplete information with the particular tension that comes from not yet knowing what incomplete information is hiding. The patrol car rolled to a stop at the curb. Both doors opened. Both officers stepped out with the calibrated readiness of people who have learned that the gap between routine and not routine can close very quickly. She heard the car, looked up, didn't drop the shears, didn't raise them, didn't move toward the officers or away from them, just looked. The way you look at something that has entered your peripheral world but hasn't yet required you to respond to it. One officer moved to the fence line. Step away from the yard, hands where we can see them. The words carried. Neighbors 2 lots down looked up from their porch. A woman walking a stroller slowed, stopped, turned. The sound of a command in a quiet street has a particular acoustic quality. It doesn't just travel, it lands. On walls, on windows, on the people who hear it and immediately begin trying to understand what it means about the world they're standing in. She set the shears down on the low fence post beside her. Slowly, deliberately, and then she stood there, hands at her sides, and did something that the officers had not anticipated. Nothing. No explanation. No movement toward them. No reaching for identification. No lifted voice. No display of indignation. No performance of innocence. Just stillness. And the stillness, rather than resolving the officer's uncertainty, deepened it. The first 30 seconds of silence were the hardest. Not because anything dramatic had happened. Nothing had. No raised voices from her side, no escalating gestures, no behavior that fit any of the categories that training had prepared them for. Just a woman standing in a yard, hands at her sides, looking at them with an expression that was not afraid and not aggressive and not, as far as either officer could read it, anything that fit neatly into what this moment was supposed to be, which was the problem. The frameworks that work in these situations, the ones built from training and experience and the accumulated pattern recognition of a job that requires rapid, high-stakes assessment, depend on signals, on reactions, on people behaving in ways that can be categorized quickly and responded to accordingly. Compliance looked a certain way, Resistance looked a certain way. Even the performance of innocence had recognizable features. She wasn't performing anything. And the absence of performance, the genuine, uncalculated stillness of someone who simply did not feel the need to prove something in this moment, read, to people who needed to read something, as withholding. The first officer moved closer to the fence. "Ma'am, I need you to identify yourself." She looked at him steadily. "I heard you," she said. Her voice was level, not cold, not warm, simply calibrated. The voice of someone who is choosing each word the way you choose each step on uneven ground. Not because they're unsure of where they're going, because they're being careful about how they get there. She didn't provide identification. Not because she was refusing. Something in her manner made that clear, if you were paying attention closely enough. More because she was waiting for something. The same quality she'd had at the beginning, that particular patient stillness that isn't passivity, but is its own form of knowing, was still there, intact, beneath the pressure building around her. The neighbors had gathered, 7 or 8 of them now, ranged along the sidewalk on the opposite side of the street at a distance that said they were watching, but hadn't yet decided how to feel about it. Phones were up, some recording, some just held. That modern reflex of reaching for documentation before reaching for understanding. "Is she okay?" someone said, to no one in particular. Nobody answered, because nobody knew. The second officer had moved to a flanking position, standard procedure when a subject wasn't responding as expected, designed to reduce variables and increase the controlled quality of the situation. He was doing everything right. Both of them were doing everything right by the criteria that governed what right looked like in this context. The criteria were the problem, because the criteria had been built for a set of situations that this, whatever this was not quite fitting. And the gap between what they expected and what was in front of them was not widening into chaos. It was compressing into something quieter and more difficult. The specific tension of a moment that is about to make a demand that the current framework cannot meet. One more step forward. The distance between the officer and the fence had narrowed to the length of an outstretched arm. The most dangerous situations aren't always the loudest. They're the ones built on the wrong assumptions. If you've ever seen things escalate for the wrong reason, type MISREED below. She watched him come closer. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes moved, just once, briefly, to the far end of the street. Like she had heard something the rest of them hadn't yet. And then the neighborhood heard it too. The sound came first. Low, heavy, the kind of engine note that doesn't belong in a residential street at this hour, or any hour. Not the light hum of a family sedan or the clatter of a delivery truck, but something with real mechanical weight underneath it. The sound of vehicles that were built to move with purpose and didn't particularly care whether the environment they entered was prepared for them. 2 black SUVs turned onto the street from the far end. No lights, no sirens, moving at the precise, unhurried speed of something that knows it will not be delayed. The effect on the gathered crowd was immediate and instinctive. Phones lowered. Conversations stopped. People stepped back from the sidewalk edge with the unconscious deference that the body produces before the mind has caught up to why. The SUVs stopped at the curb, directly in front of the yard. For a moment, nothing happened. The officers at the fence held their positions, but had stopped advancing. Not a decision exactly, more a reflex. Something in the arrival of those vehicles had interrupted the forward momentum of the situation, the way a hand placed on a surface stops something from sliding further. Without drama, without announcement, just stopped it. The doors opened. The people who stepped out moved with the economy of those who have never once needed to perform authority because they have never once been in a situation where it wasn't already understood. Suits, not uniforms. Dark, plain, nothing decorative about them. 3 individuals who fanned out with the coordinated naturalness of people who have rehearsed nothing because there's nothing to rehearse. This is simply how they move. They didn't look at the crowd. They didn't look at the officers, not immediately, not in any way that could be read as confrontational or condescending. They looked at her. One of them, the one who had come from the lead vehicle, who moved with the particular quietness of someone accustomed to being the person other people orient toward, walked to the fence, stopped beside it, looked at her across the low barrier, and nodded. Once. Clean. The nod of someone checking in with a colleague after a brief interruption. She nodded back. The entire exchange lasted less than 3 seconds and communicated to anyone watching carefully enough everything that the previous 10 minutes had failed to clarify. Not through explanation, not through any document produced or credential displayed, through the simple, legible language of how people treat each other when the hierarchy between them is so thoroughly understood that it doesn't require performance. She was not below him. The officers had gone still in the way that people go still when they understand, without being told, that the coordinates of a situation have just been recalibrated in a significant way. The first officer lowered the hand that had been extended toward the fence, not quickly, not with any gesture that acknowledged error, just lowered it, as though the command that had been in the air had now simply dissolved because the air had changed. One of the suited figures turned toward the officers. He didn't raise his voice, didn't gesture toward them, or at the yard, or at anything that had just happened. Just spoke, low, direct, the tone of someone delivering information rather than making an accusation. "We appreciate your response. The situation is handled." That was all. No badge produced for inspection, no rank invoked, no explanation of what the situation was or how it had come to be handled or what precisely they were thanking the officers for. Just the clean closure of a door that didn't need to be slammed to be shut. The senior officer held eye contact for a moment, processing, then nodded, stepped back. His partner was already moving toward the patrol car. She had turned back to her yard. Not dramatically, not with the satisfaction of someone who has just won something, with the simple practicality of someone who has an hour of daylight left, and work that was interrupted, and that she intends, now that the interruption has concluded, to finish. She picked up the garden shears, set them against the fence post she'd left them on, and continued working. The patrol car pulled away without urgency, no conversation between the officers as they left. Or if there was, it was the quiet kind. The kind that happens when two people are both processing the same thing and have nothing yet to say about it that would make the processing easier. Sometimes the right response to a significant recalibration is to simply carry it in silence for a while and see what it becomes. The SUVs remained at the curb for another few minutes. Then, without announcement, they too left, pulling away in the same steady, unhurried way they had arrived, disappearing around the corner at the far end of the street and returning the road to the ordinary proportion it had always had. The crowd didn't disperse immediately. People stood on the opposite sidewalk for a while, not filming anymore, not really, just standing there with the particular residual energy of witnesses to something they haven't yet fully categorized. What they had seen was legible enough in its broad strokes. A woman, officers, escalating tension, vehicles that arrived and ended it. A nod between two people that seemed to mean more than any of the words that had come before it. But the specifics, who she was, what those vehicles carried, what the nod had meant, those remained unspoken and would stay that way. Nobody went up to ask her. She was still in the yard, working, unhurried, the garden shears moving through the overgrown bed with the patient rhythm of someone who is simply doing what needs doing. Her posture had not changed from the moment the officers had arrived at this one. The same quietness, the same lack of performance, the same quality of someone who had not needed the external resolution to know how the situation was going to resolve. She had simply waited. A neighbor, the woman with the stroller, who had stopped 2 lots down and watched the whole thing from a careful distance, finally continued her walk. But as she passed the fence, she slowed slightly, looked at the woman in the yard, didn't say anything, but the way she looked had changed. Not with recognition, she still didn't know who this was, or what those vehicles meant, or what the quiet nod between two people at a fence had contained, but with something else. The particular shift in the way you regard someone when the world has briefly demonstrated that you didn't have them fully in frame. She pushed the stroller past, the afternoon settled back into itself, and she kept working. Authority doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it doesn't need to say anything at all. The real mistake isn't being wrong, it's being certain before you understand. Because the people who carry the most weight are rarely the ones making the most noise. They're the ones who can afford, completely, to wait. If this story made you rethink what real authority looks like, subscribe to Steel Resolve for more stories where silence changes everything.